For reasons you'll come to understand, I feel I ought to at least attempt to describe, explain my surroundings. The room, here where I'm sitting, my room. My work is piled everywhere, mountains of it. I don't recall when my work got the better of me. When does a sewer rat start smelling of piss? Does one remember it any other way?
The dimensions are 18 foot by 10 foot. The walls 9 foot. My nephew painted them for me. There are 2 desks, but they have become one under this blanket, or dare I say sheet, forgive me, of paper. I can barely find a fucking pen anymore. There is one, devoid of ink, therefore purpose, that keeps finding its way back to me. It mocks me.
He's quite removed from Laurent when he starts. You can hear that in his voice. I think it's the kind of writer he was. Objective, non-judgmental. I can't hear it in the script though. There's an adoption of Laurent's mannerisms, but there's something lacking. Is Leonard around for a chat?
He's doing some rewrites. Do you want me to call him?
No, don't worry.
I mean, just play your way, you know, if you can hear it, if you feel comfortable with it.
I do. Yeah. It's the best way, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, we can play around with it in the edit, and I'm sure we can find space for a couple of reshoots if we need to, okay?
Tomas Laurent was born in 1585. After 4 years' work, this particular hard-fought-for kernel of truth I defend with a certain amount of pride. There is a statue of Descartes in Tours, one of Fermat in Beaumont de la Magne. But Laurent doesn't even have a grave, that I could find anyway. His name appears in some city records, but there was little to start with. It made me wonder at the time why I chose men like him. Maybe it was because of that half-decade of success. Pirates, wanderers, brigands of the Caucasus, the heady heights of best-selling books of plunder and bloodshed. But when the numbers plummet, when co-authors rake it on the lecture circuit, and are more handsome and photogenic on the steps of the High Court, where do I end up? Where? In northern France, in 1585, drinking with long-dead geometers.
Do you worry this may be seen as a step back?
How do you mean?
While you've gone from shorts to TV to features and now back to shorts.
I think you misunderstand what we're doing.
No, please. If we ask certain questions, it doesn't necessarily mean we specifically believe them. We have room here. The articles are going to run for half a dozen issues, so we can take time to reveal you to our readers.
Yeah, am I really that notorious for giving interviews?
If the chance should arise, then we're going to get all we can get, I suppose.
Well, I try not to read my own press. It's more like an album format, really. It's a selection of tracks to be listened to, or in this case watched as a whole.
So why have you started with Robert Moore then?
When the Church absorbed the sciences into the Gospels, geometry became an indicator of the divine, a representation of God's act of creation. The Dark Ages were much darker because of this. If science had become an extension of doctrine, then surely it was free of doubt. And science, free of doubt, is no longer science. It is the very act of doubting, of questioning, of exploration, the destruction of the old, no, that's too harsh, the disregard of the old that fuels discovery. Dogma forces us back into stasis. So it needed to be taken out of pagan hands, out of the hands of the Greeks, the Muslims, and brought back into step with the Christian God. Mark that down in lowercase, transcribers. But these early explorers of the invisible had been forced underground long before this. It may have been in Alexandria when the library burnt down for the final time. Maybe then they knew what the future held for them. Thankfully, some forbidden texts survived, smuggled underground, passed from person to person, teacher to student for 1,000 years. The romantic in me imagines it taking place in dark subterranean passages, lit only by flickering torchlight. Cryptic marks on doorways, triangles perhaps, or parallel lines traversed. But instead, it took place between ostensibly presentable academics and traders behind locked doors. I worked my way backwards from Tomas Laurent and found them in stately homes, early universities, Constantinople, Salerno, codes of silence, secret meetings. We must be, even though we are now ignorant of it, thankful for the heretics in our midst. Through sheer perseverance, the obstinate Laurent joined them purely by accident. It was his unquenchable thirst for information that led him to these sects, but they showed him none of their usual nepotistic ways. They simply used Laurent as their poster boy, if such a thing exists.
Yeah. I can hear humour. It's very subtle, very dark, but humour nonetheless. As if he's in on a joke and we're not.
Right, well, I just don't see that. He's such a desperate man, I feel. I mean, usually you look for the man behind the performance, but here he is reading the lines to us, and I just don't see that. Barely submerged rage, maybe. Should we talk about this outside, though?
Remember, though, these aren't lines to him. He's not aware. And if he is, I don't think he cares about how he sounds. This isn't a blueprint for his emotions. You know, that hidden subtext that underlines all our words and actions. I agree there's rage there, vast amounts, but because of this, he is not aware.
Okay, look, I appreciate that. why don't we try 2 takes? Shift it between the 2. Now, I know you're a performer of subtleties, so you can don't go too far either way.
If such a thing existed in 17th century France, and by the time the fanatics slipped back into darkness and the light shone once again, he was there, at the centre. He became one of the central translators of the texts. But he might as well have been an interpreter. You see, the curves and the points must have been burnt into him, so much so that it's likely he could have recited them in Arabic, Greek, or Latin. To be aware of that terrible link with the thing you study, obsess with, is one thing. To recognize yourself in that obsession is quite another. Here I am, reciting the life of a man into a microphone. I've no notes in front of me. I could do the same with 6 other men in so much detail they would appear before your very eyes. Tomas Laurent went much further. The men I have recreated have already existed. Now, he took the works of other men and with them built new roads. Whereas I have to stop where the man stops. Because of Laurent, their work lives in the very spaces around us. To know this space is one thing. To be able to map it is another. Laurent worked tirelessly, obsessing, as scientists do, to the point of recklessness. Imagine, in that abstraction he created for himself, points starting to appear, analytical geometry. Imagine, in that abstraction he created for himself, points starting to appear, once unformed ideas, ancient half notes scribbled in Arabic. Then slowly, these points becoming coordinates, analytical geometry. The manipulation of the discipline by coordinate and equation.
So, how do you feel now, looking back over a decade's worth of serious work?
What do you mean the work I did before wasn't serious?
Okay. Work in the spotlight. I mean, how do you feel about your work? Do you rewatch any of them?
Very rarely. There was one on the other day my daughter was watching. I watched about 20 minutes of it with her.
And?
And what? I can't change anything, so regret seems a bit of a pointless emotion. I just try and learn and move on.
Which one was it? Not the film that should not be mentioned, hopefully.
No, thankfully not. Controversy can have a blinkering effect.
How do you feel about that particular work now?
I suppose, for better or worse, it defines me.
His work as a translator stigmatized him. He became the tender of the path, rather than the layer of a new one. Descartes, a close colleague at the time, as we know, took the credit. Whether or not this was René's design is open to debate. Here I only make an enemy of history, not of those she wields. What happened? Laurent, in a fragile state, attacked Descartes at his home. He suffered a broken rib. Laurent was arrested and on his eventual release was shunned by the scientific community. Soon his money ran out, and after contracting tuberculosis, he died. Penniless, friendless. Forgotten. I don't know whether it's a trick of the light, so to speak. The way coincidence is formed when more is learnt of a subject. Wedding songs aren't always actually about the bride, the groom. I'm not a fool. But there is a resonant coincidence between why Tomas Laurent sat coughing himself dry in his hovel of a room, surrounded by his research. And why I sit here in mine.
Look, you see, this is the reason I avoid interviews. You see this now.
We have to ask questions. There's no point in us being here if we don't. You did allow this.
Yeah, but you're assuming because you saw the film a certain way that it is that way. And if you were to apply a feminist critique to the film, I'm sure you'd find plenty of gender-based themes. It certainly doesn't mean I put them there.
Mean that.
Well, that's how you worded the question.
Okay. There's a common belief that there's a common theme in your work.
Well, you might think that, but you're not right about it.
But we're not wrong either.
That too.
But I won't allow this to turn into being about him. Fine. He legally won the plaudits. His name is next to that tiny circled C on the inside cover, but he didn't create it. So they can cite all the laws under the sun as far as I'm concerned, because he knows it will never actually be his. He's too bloody arrogant to let this eat away at him, though. The only thing he has on me, the only thing that makes my skin crawl, is that people will remember him. I wrote it. I created it. But the memory of a text is just as much a part of it as the words. So do we write to write? To be read? Or do we write to be remembered? and what actually happens when you're still writing and you've been forgotten. Maybe Laurent sat in his room, having nightmares about the future glorification of Descartes, and thought in envious... No, not envy. You envy something someone else possesses. You can't envy what was never theirs in the first place. Not in my fucking book anyway. Maybe he thought, if I can't be remembered for giving the world fixed points, points to hang calculus on, calculus that gave us fucking computers, then maybe I'll be remembered for killing the man the whole thing did. Now, should I take Laurent's example and storm over to my enemy's house and kick in his door and listen to his wife scream while I crush his head in with a doorstop? Will that provide the memory of my loss of work or the memory of my violent act?
Would you like us to rephrase the question?
Do you think that event influenced the way children are depicted in your films?
No. No, I don't think that. Do you?
Sorry, can I have a word? A second, please.
Excuse me.
He biographed spaces, stored the work of men long dead. I collect the memories of men long forgotten. I've ceased to be a man. I've become an object, a container, a neglected barrier against the collective forgetfulness. But perhaps those people, the people who, for all their knowledge, existed of their own accord, perhaps they existed from the starting points left by others. Euclid, Archimedes, Al-Khwarizmi. Perhaps then, through their own discovery, through intrigue, adventure, both physical and academic, through great leaps of instinct, they created themselves. And perhaps those people have dwindled to nothing now. Extinct. Now, we exist in the image of others, by example, through memory, through envy, through self-help manuals, fitness regimes, stories of triumph over adversity, predictable stories of abuse, gossip, business mantras, catwalks. with memory, resigning those who have fought and died, those who formed the true world, the true, terrifying, shatteringly unknowable world, resigning those who wrote it into being to nothingness. But maybe the curse of their terrible truths is that they will always outlive their documenter. They existed long before as axioms, unburdened by our codes, our pitiful mortal attempts at understanding. Oh, but then we understand this space around us just as little as we understand the people that fill it. We struggle to know ourselves. So how is it possible I have discovered, to my own great tragedy, to ever know someone else? To know someone you lie in bed with, you work with, you read about, that you've dug through centuries of information to try and remold like some crude golem. But then, Tomas Laurent may have thought in his last hours that he too had been digging back to the beginning of time, when space was all-encompassing, finally realizing that we exist on a succession of tiny victories over the void. So, here I sit, still, now morbidly aware that with all a fusion of geometry and rancid memory, yet still unsure whether it is worse to be unjustly obliterated or to be remembered unjustly.